Hello, everyone. Welcome to SAP Industries Live, Leading with Innovation. This is an ongoing series exploring how different industries are coping with the massive transformations that have taken place across the last year and are trying to move into new directions to better embrace this future that's coming at us quite rapidly. Today's focus is on higher education and research institutions, and we've got two fantastic speakers. Vince Kellen is the CIO at the University of California, San Diego, and Malcolm Woodfield is the head of SAP's Higher Education and Research Group. Vince, Malcolm, welcome to SAP Industries Live event today. Hope you guys are doing well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there is so much going on today, right, guys? There's everything from the incredible financial pressure that's been put on higher education these days. I think, Malcolm, you had said at one point it could be even in the U.S. as high as $150 billion of revenue that has gone away. There's the whole notions about, what happens now with the notion of hybrid work, the holistic approach, Vince, that you've talked about. And I think in some ways, this realization that the future of work, it's not somewhere out in the future, it is hitting us now. So lots of things to talk about. And Vince is a CIO at a prestigious higher education institution. What is sort of the main thing that is keeping you sleepless at night these days?
Well, for us, it's how do we get back to on-campus existence? And we're working that really hard right now. For our undergraduate population, we are a premise-based institution, as many institutions are in the United States and globally. And so how do you make sure you can do that? What we're learning certainly is a classroom can be safe. It's really all the social activity around that. And how do we do that? So we're carefully watching all of that. We're carefully and aggressively pushing out testing and vaccinations and a whole lot of analysis of data to keep tabs of things. But that's the number one thing. How do we get back to our missions, even though we do know our missions are going to change quite a bit?
Yeah, and Malcolm, I had touched briefly on that remarkable number that you threw out. There's the financial side of it as well. I think this is discussed in some ways almost like the environmental, the physical notion of getting back to the classrooms. But gosh, there is extraordinary financial pressure, right?
Yeah. Well, and these two factors come together, what Vince just talked about. And when Vince talks about getting back to campus, he means that he's not just talking about getting students back in the classroom for live classes. What he's also saying is that for most students, let's face it, the point of the rite of passage of going through a university education is that you share that experience on a campus. And Vince runs a campus on the technology side, and he is effectively running a city, right? It's not just about classrooms and labs. He's got to provide transportation, safety and security. He's got to feed people, house people, heal people, entertain people, right? He's running a small town there, otherwise known as La Jolla and San Diego, but he calls it University of California, San Diego. Right? So that's the really important thing, is why the value is now being kind of challenged or questioned, because the value is in that experience and not just in the takeaways from a lecture, because that can be delivered online. Let me give you a quick example of how these two kind of the financial aspect and the campus experience come together. So I have a customer who in recent years has spent a lot of time expanding their brand, if you like, beyond their state, right? And I'm not going to tell you which state because it'll give the whole story away, but they're known as a state provider, a prestigious school within the state, but expanding that. Then COVID comes along, right? So they've been quite successful at doing that, and they have a lot of out-of-state students now coming to campus, only to tell them, sorry, classes are all online. So those students in this is a true story, said, okay, we're going to now withdraw and enroll at our home state university, fraction of the cost, but guess what? We're staying here, right? So they get the campus, or at least the college town experience, but they're paying a fraction of the cost. So they're okay. but the tuition fees have evaporated, right? And just give you some idea of the twists that this whole thing is taking, and how these two questions are the experience and the financial impact are very, very closely tied together. And it's by no means just about online or in person. That's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, and I want to be sure to also invite all of you folks in the audience to please participate in this conversation with Vince and Malcolm via the chat function on your screen here. Again, you've got two people who know as much or more about this than just about any two people in the world. So please take advantage of that. Send in your questions. We'll get to as many of those as we can. Vince, I wanted to check in with you because one of the things, in addition to some of those dynamics that Malcolm just mentioned, you described it. There's a pretty interesting split here between the willingness to sort of jump into the online side of the hybrid equation here. More so, it seems like, I believe you said that for adult education, that's been really quite strong. So talk a little bit about that, and what are some of the factors there? Where do you see that headed?
Well, I think the pandemic and COVID has certainly shown many universities that faculty can do this, although with some difficulty. They can do it. Learners can learn, although not all equally. But the market, as you split it into two, between the traditional 18 to 22-year-old group and the adult continuous learner, the future is the adult continuous learner. All demographics in the United States point clearly to that. And that's where digital affordances really work well, because these are learners who they're in the workforce, they're in the environment, they've gone through certain maturations, they have more skills to pick up. And so there's an ability to do, less, what I call less than degree load, or modules or small certificates that stackable or stack up to earn a degree at some point. All those things are now to the fore. We've been talking about them for a couple decades now, but I think COVID has really brought it to the fore. And so my hope is, coming out of this, that the rebound effect from COVID will be the institutions are even better positioned to handle the adult learner market.
Yeah, Malcolm, what are you seeing in that area?
Well, it's interesting. We talk about falling enrollments and falling tuition fees and so on here in the US. In Europe, the opposite has been happening. Enrollments are actually up. In Europe, tuition, of course, is lower, so there's not quite, it's a different financial landscape, although it's no longer, completely, quote, free. In Europe, there are tuition, but nevertheless, we've seen an uptick in enrollments, especially from workers who see this as an opportunity to upskill, reskill. That is more of a European kind of culture. Of going back to school to get a skill or maybe a training, and less of a focus on, as I said, the sort of rite of passage going through the university experience. So there's a bit of there are some global variations here, but certainly, as I say, in Europe, we're seeing, we've always seen a focus on lifelong learning. It's always been an EU initiative, for example, a kind of sponsorship across Europe. So we're kind of seeing that start to pay off. Whereas here in North America, we've been traditionally a bit more focused on, the K through 22 education model. But as Vince said, that has been evolving for years. And so, like a lot of things, thanks to COVID, there has certainly have been radical changes, but also I think a lot of things that have simply were trends and movements that have simply gone into kind of warp speed, right? Including, you mentioned the future of work, right? So we've been talking about the future of work as a kind of a trend, a talking point for several years, but now, right, we're all working from home, and many companies have said, this is it now, and universities too. And so that has been a trend, but is now really, become a reality almost overnight. And so for us as a technology partner to universities, the challenge or the conversation for us with universities is, okay, what are the technical investments that you're going to have to make now to, in a way, catch up with the reality right? So you've been talking about online learning for students and for employees, right? Training and so on. You've been talking about that. Now you've got to do it. And so where do you make those investments? So there are two parts to the financial crisis. One is, how do we recoup the 150 billion that we've lost in tax and donations and grants and tuition? But also, where do we invest now to turn this kind of overnight reality into a new operating model, a new business model, if you like? And that will take very careful, strategic, if you like, surgical investments in digital technology.
Yeah, and Malcolm and Vince, I want to come back to you on that point, slightly different angle on it. So clearly that has to happen, right? The digital capabilities, right, are going to be so fundamental to this change. But it's also, and we see this across every industry, and higher education is no different. And there might have been a perception on higher education over time that it has been somewhat slow to adapt to change. It moves at its own pace. But this urgency now, Malcolm, that you're describing, Vince, are higher education institutions ready to begin making decisions in much smaller increments of time and more decisively than they have before?
Yeah, I'll tackle that in two dimensions. I actually think higher education is far more adaptive than people realize.
Yeah.
And it is adaptive. However, it adapts in tune with the culture. And the culture of higher education is very old. It's a couple thousand years old. So it's not a culture that changes quickly. People's preferences and desires, what they want to learn and how they want to learn it, are a little bit more eternal. But there is no question that the pandemic has thrust a lot of instruction online really quick, certainly remote work online. And I think what Malcolm was describing was this notion of swirl or blended experiences, where institutions are mixing and matching between themselves how to put together an educational experience for the student. And I think the same thing is occurring on the digital front. Certainly that's what we're thinking about, is how do I provide for a digital experience that works well with the on-premise experience? Yeah. And so we're reblending and we're remixing the student experiences in higher education writ large. I think that's a good thing. It leads to better shared services between institutions. If one institution can handle a certain set of classes better and done remotely, and another student lets those transfer in, it's better for everybody, generally. And so I think this is breaking down some of the barriers on that just out of necessity.
Vince, I just want to do one follow-up with you there. We had a question from someone in the audience who asked about, in this sort of environment, are we going to continue to have this tradition of a 4-year education? Or where's that headed?
Yeah, my view on this is that's here to stay. Now, the question would be for whom? And that's what I worry about, because certainly for the well-to-do and those who have the resources, or in governments and states where they've provided it, the 18 to 22-year-old crowd or thereabouts will continue their education as they need to. The economy, the bachelor's is almost the new high school degree. And the wage differential in the U.S. between having the bachelor's and the not is about $1.5 million over the earnings lifetime of the individual. So it's a big number. So I think that undergraduate experience and the premise-based experience is not going away. In much the same way, destination resorts will not necessarily go away. Disney theme parks probably won't go away. We are Homo sapiens, primates that like to band together in pyramidal groups and collaborate with each other. What's going to change, though, is perhaps the level and the digital integration that occurs, right? So this notion of how to take a digital story and a physical face-to-face story and blend them together into an experience for the learner.
Yeah, Malcolm, just a follow-up on that, another question from the audience. How much online fatigue is there with students who want the on-campus experience?
Well, the pivot to online learning has been, in some ways, incredibly successful in the speed of that turnaround. but in some ways also it's been executed with bits of string and chewing gum and duct tape. Yeah. In other words, it's what when we talk about UX or UI, we talk about putting lipstick on a pig, right? And in a sense, online learning is lipstick on a pig, in the sense that, okay, of course we can here is your Teams account, off you go, right? Fine. But there's a lot in the background that has to be taken care of, especially if you're going to provide any level of personalized learning, right? And increasingly, that's what students are looking for and demanding. Yeah, they don't simply want to be on a Zoom call with 300 people, right? And so students are still going to look for that personal, measurement of how they're doing, feedback on how they're doing, and so on. So that's really has been kind of interrupted, and I think that will have to to come back. And actually, Vince at UCSD is really in the forefront of really identifying what students on an individual basis, what's driving them, what they're interested in, where they're going. And I think that has been a little bit interrupted by this, but that will have to come back, right? Even in the hybrid model. And the second point is that there are a lot of things in what we call the back office that have to be digitized if online learning is to really work, right? So if you're billing students, right, for classes, that has to be digitized. It doesn't happen kind of automatically as a result of simply giving them a Zoom account or a Microsoft Teams account.
Yeah, Vince, along with what Malcolm just spoke about there, you've talked about that the power of data, and that all these changes, all this evolution, this transformation that has to happen, it cannot happen unless you're able to collect that data and help lead toward more of these unique, personalized experiences. So are higher education institutions ready for that?
Oh, yes. I mean, I've been following this trend for a number of years and trying to push the trend actually with the industry. And COVID has probably done more to accelerate the analytics into learning than anything. And it's very simple. When all your students are only available digitally, you can only know of them digitally. So that means you got to look at data. And many institutions are now very aggressively looking at their learning analytics, looking at the student engagement involvement in the class via what they can glean from their LMS data and their other systems. And that's important. It's the only way to do this at scale and efficiently. And now it's going to take some time for institutions to learn how to do that. You certainly don't want to do this to replace what I call high quality, high touch, face-to-face experiences. What you really want to do is use this to enable more high quality, high touch, face-to-face experiences, not less, by clearing sort of the most of the mundane out of it. So yes, institutions are moving forward rapidly. The good news is I hate to say it, it's a good thing there's a pandemic, but it's timed fairly well, because much of this work in analytics we've been pushing almost in a desert for 5 years now. Mm-hmm. And we're coming out of this pandemic with a lot of interesting use cases from different universities and what they're doing with the analytics to help student success.
Hey, Malcolm, along those lines, we had a question from the audience about the need for advanced security training for secure, complex apps like some of those from SAP.
This follows directly on from what Vince has said. It's, if you like, it's the downside, right? The need to maintain security, privacy, and so on. And again, going back to Europe, a huge issue in Europe, especially given another big trend, of course, is the move to cloud applications, cloud-based systems off-premise. And there is a lot of nervousness about where is that data? Where is my data? I think here in the US, where we've simply become used to it, and that's probably not a good thing, right? We should not be complacent. I think in Europe, there's still a greater level of concern about data. So it's very much part of all of our business, and particularly in light of what Vince said, which is the importance of collecting, analyzing, consolidating data, especially because universities are looking for a 360-degree view of their students. Just as in the retail world, retailers are looking for a 360-degree view of their customers, right? You know, when you buy something from Amazon, right, the next week you'll get a message saying, well, you bought this, maybe you'd be interested in this. Well, how do you think they're doing that, right? And universities want to do the same thing. Oh, you took this course. Now, it used to be now you've got to take this course, right? That doesn't fly with your millennial student. Now it has to be a suggestion, a recommendation. There has to be value. And the cost has to be a reflection of this. I have a customer in Latin America who implemented a billing solution for their students, online students from SAP. And the chief financial officer said to me, look, this is my pricing model, right, for students. He said, when you get onto a plane, right, everyone on that plane is paying a different fare. Pretty much everyone, depending on when you bought the ticket, who you bought it from, blah, blah, right? There's no one fare. He said, that should be the model in higher education. There's no one price for this course. He says, I want to be able to put courses on sale. I want to be able to offer discounts, bundling, you know, you name it. So there's going to be a whole new world, particularly, as I say, in terms of the cost of education to the consumer, that is, say, to the student and to their parents.
Malcolm, that's a remarkable point there in this issue of dynamic pricing that has hit various markets at different stages. It sounds like a perfect point here. Vince, I wanted to follow up with you. A question from the audience. Our audience friend says this is said in a friendly and minimally critical tone, but wants to know about the lifetime, your comment about the lifetime earnings of a BA, BS versus not. The questioner says, but I also see tremendous emotional innovation capacity and fulfillment value in the knowledge and experience itself. Reducing the value of an education to earnings often diminishes the bigger importance.
Oh, you know, of course, I'm a Jeffersonian at heart. An informed citizen is the greatest prevention against tyranny. That said, that's not the expectations for many of our learners. The number one concern for our learners is employability and movement forward. So, and by the way, I was a studio art major and a communications major in my undergraduate degree, so I certainly know extremely well the value of a liberal arts education that appears on the face of it not to pay off, but it really does. But that said, the push coming from families is around betterment. I mean, you got to think about higher education. If it's an industry, it's a really interesting industry because absolutely every person who comes in is looking for a significant improvement in their life because of their engagement in higher education. For families and their kids are looking for a transformation, a profound experience. Even for the adult learner, there's a level of profundity that's expected. It's a very large share of wallet and effort and time for those individuals. This is an extremely dense, difficult product and servicing we offer to the world. And so even looking at it from industry terms, it's at a very extreme end of this, what I call tremendous complexity of cost and desire from the person.
Vince, and then Malcolm, if I could, we are getting some wonderful questions from the audience here. Somebody wants to know, Vince, could you share how your university is monitoring students on engagement and perhaps as well on the topic of mental health, since that is, quite an urgent issue?
Yeah, mental health has been the story, the quiet story of the last 10 years, and not a good story because the level of mental health issues on campuses have risen rather significantly in the last decade. On our side, we've got predictive algorithm for trying to determine if a student looks like they're going to be able to graduate in 4 years or 6 years, and we use that in our advising to help guide and advise the student. We've used a lot of the analytics to sort of look at our curriculum over the last several years and see where we can tidy up to make it easier for students to accomplish their degree in 4 years. As you know, some degrees like to pile on requirements and courses that elongate the degree. So we've got numerous cases of that. Even just simple things, has a student gone AWOL in my class? Have they disappeared? And can we reach out to them to find out what's what? Just simple things like that. And I think that's where it needs to be. We need to start with very simple, tangible, practical things that we can do to help students.
Malcolm, what do you think?
Well, I think this goes back to your earlier point about privacy and security also. I mean, universities have always had a lot of insight into what students are doing or not doing. I think the difference is that now a lot of universities, and including what Vince is doing at UCSD, is taking all of those data sources and hooking them up, right? And that's what I mean by a 360-degree view. So, historically, student data has lived in 10, 15, 20 different databases, right? And I'm talking about all kinds of, including attendance, parking, using the gym facilities, right? All of these things, right? When a student swipes that card, that data goes somewhere, but they don't talk to each other, right? So you can have, for example, a student not show up for, say, in their dorm for 2 weeks, but that doesn't necessarily send up a red flag, in another part of the system. So what universities are very interested in doing is connecting the dots, right? And when you connect the dots, that's when you get that 360-degree view. So we're not talking about a sort of a new or additional level of intrusion into the student's mind. Not at all. It's actually more about getting an insight into that picture. As one of my customers said to me a couple of years ago, I can go into Facebook and learn more about my students than I can from any source that we have, on campus. And that's what we're looking for, is that more holistic view of the student. So this comes back to your question about, what about the other values of education? Absolutely. Because students are also looking for that holistic view, not just, what's my GPA, but that's just a part of it and not such a big part of it. And by the way, this is happening in the workforce too, right? So a lot of companies, including SAP, we no longer really do annual performance reviews or interim performance reviews. It's more about how am I doing? How can I do better? And students are on exactly the same track, because today's students are tomorrow's employees, and that's what they will expect too. Don't just tell me, am I going to pass or fail this course? Tell me how I'm doing. Tell me how I can do better.
Yeah, Vince, so digging into that a little bit more, you had described, I think, very eloquently that notion of how families send off someone to college for 4 years, and they're expecting not just, grades and degrees and so forth like that, but a growth in the individual at an extraordinary part of that person's life. So on this notion, I think you've described it some, Malcolm's talked about it some, this desire within the university itself to grow the amount of data it has and the ability to understand that. Do you find that the families and the students themselves are equally willing to participate in the right ways?
Well, I get to this notion of authenticity. If the institution is very authentic in its service of the student, of course the students and their families will be behind it. When it looks like the institution is no longer authentic in what it's trying to do and is being crass or disrespectful, no, of course not. As one student said, well, why aren't you helping me with the data? If you have the data and you could help me, why aren't you helping me? And I've often thought about that. In fact, one student, we were showing him some of the analytics we're doing there. Like, goodness gracious, if I knew that my freshman year, I would have changed a few things. Mm-hmm. And those are the voices that haunt me from the students. Yeah. The things that they think they could find themselves useful if they had the information. And so we got to keep focused on being student-centric and authentic in everything we do, and build the value proposition for everything we do around that. And of course, I think the students and the families will appreciate that, and they'll select universities because of that.
Malcolm, how optimistic or not are you about the state of higher education being student-centric these days?
I'm actually 100% optimistic. It's something we've been talking about for a long time. We've been talking about a student-centric campus. And frankly, we are now there. It's really a question of, as I said, how do we now change the operating model of the university to be student centric. We have all the tools, we have the data. It is really the rest of the institution, everything on the, if you like, the business side, which needs now to get behind that. But I think this is kind of a juggernaut now, and there's no stopping it.
Yeah, Vince, lots of interesting challenges, dynamics, possibilities going on here at this time of extraordinary change. Is there something that you feel SAP is doing really well for you at UCSD right now? What are a couple things that you wish either SAP or other technology partners can help do better for you?
Well, I certainly being CIO, I'm concerned about information. That's why they put information in the title CIO. And so then that leaves information management. And certainly the SAP tools give us great information management capability and analytics and machine learning. I think what I would very much like all of higher education to do is continue to evolve our ability to serve our missions, as I said earlier, in an authentic way using data. And for institutions, data is so key to us, and for privacy reasons, so key to the person. So I appreciate SAP's stance on that, being extremely privacy centric. In my world, not all vendors share that. They view the data as theirs, not yours. And that becomes a problem in higher education. Always does and will always be a problem. So the other thing I'm hoping for is improvements in privacy law in the United States. We got real good privacy law here in California, but hopefully we'll get some more elsewhere in the States that really give the ownership and control of a bulk of the data to the people who need to have it, and that's primarily the students.
Malcolm, what are your thoughts? I think, a second ago when Vince was talking about that notion of authenticity, right? There's no question the data is there. There's no question the tools are there to be shared, but it's almost like it, again, on that knife edge of the culture and technology side. What are some things that you would suggest that higher education does to try to, push that level of authenticity up so that all that data can be used appropriately, both for the benefit of the students and for the universities?
Well, we just talked about the student-centric, campus, but I think if there can be two centers, it also has to be employee-centric. And so we talked about the future of work, and it's not just about working from home and so on. It really is about, do we have the workforce on campus who can put in place these new business models, these new operating models? Do we have the right people who can do that? So I think there is going to be a lot of change on the workforce, a lot of upskilling. There's going to be an increase, Vince touched on this, in machine learning, automation, and so on. Tasks that don't require human management, but not hands-on manual human labor. And all of that is going to require a reevaluation of the place of the employer, whether it's an administrator or a faculty member or a researcher in that environment. That's going to be required, I think, to really increase the intimacy with the student and the larger holistic success of the student, because the student success is what we're focused on. But what that means has changed, right? It's no longer about just about getting a great job or getting a great grade point average or a great grant for a Ph.D. Those are measurements of success. Those measurements, if you like, the kind of student KPI, right, has evolved and changed. To some students, a fulfilling role in society is a genuine sign of success. So student success and the level of student engagement required to know what that is for every single student, that's a requirement, and that, as I say, will require a rethinking on the part of every employee of the university.
Yeah, it seems like these end-to-end goals cannot be achieved unless it is truly an end-to-end interconnected effort there, an initiative. So very interesting points there, Malcolm. Vince, can I ask you, what has been the impact of cloud technology, right? And how has that been a forcing function here in some ways that's allowed you to do the things that you've wanted to do for some time.
Well, one thing about the cloud, you spin back 10 years ago, you ask a bunch of CIOs about cloud, you get a bunch of frowny faces in the room, and now it's taken for granted. I was very bullish on cloud from the get-go. I'd run smallish data centers, and when I started to walk through the tremendously, enormously sized data centers, the scale effects that the cloud providers can take advantage of are just significant. And for those of us who entered the COVID with a very good portfolio of cloud solutions, there was very little we had to do in way of hardware. We just merely expanded our services quickly, and the cloud world actually did a good job of expansion into this digital realm. And so that really helped us in terms of very rapid flexibility or elasticity. And that's critical because we're a very seasonal, elastic business. So the ability to grow and shrink is extremely important to cloud. So we are, cloud first and nearly 100% cloud in everything we do. We will have the last remnants of our on-premise computing dismantled and moved entirely to the cloud. And now that creates another risk in dealing with the cloud providers, but I think we can manage that risk.
Yeah. Malcolm, how about from your side? What do you see as far as the level of readiness, eagerness, enthusiasm to embrace this?
Cloud, especially in the US, has become the default strategy, I would say. We often, grow our business by responding to requests, RFPs, requests for proposals, tenders, and so on. And increasingly, they specifically say, if you're not a cloud provider, then don't bother. Right. So the flexibility that Vince mentioned is really the big thing, right? So if you want to expand overnight on-prem, you have to, literally wheel in, a new server farm, right? But in Vince's case, he's just got to, pick up the phone and call Microsoft or Amazon or Google, right? And say, I'm upping my ante. So the flexibility has been tremendous, and in Europe, again, less so because of those privacy concerns. So there is less of an appetite there, I would say, but certainly here in the US, it's been huge. Now, very often the end user doesn't know this, right? So, one of the big online learning providers or technology platforms, for example, is a company called Blackboard. Blackboard generally, maybe exclusively, runs on Amazon Web Services. Does the student know that? No. Does the professor know that? No. So very often these are now literally in the cloud, right? They're kind of hidden, and the end user doesn't know that. So there's much more direct access, right, for the end user, and then the fundamentals of the infrastructure are, so to speak, kind of hidden, and there's a great appeal for that, right? So it's a huge trend, and is increasingly out the core of our business, is moving customers to the cloud. And one of the big drivers for that, you talked earlier, Bob, about the decision-making structure in universities being slow to change. I would say they're not so much slow to change, they're slow to make decisions.
Okay.
But quick to change. Once they've made that decision, they can execute it. And we've seen that this year. But it's a very consensual environment. Everybody has a voice. Everybody has a vote. So that can take a while. I think we may see a change there. I think, for example, in the corporate world, right, at SAP, we use Microsoft Office, right? So you have a Microsoft Office email, and that's it. That's your email address, right? A typical university might have, I don't know, Vince, how many email systems do you have?
Well, we have two. We use both Microsoft and Google.
You see, flexibility. We don't have that kind of flexibility, right? And that's typical. What I think we're going to be seeing is more centralization and standardization as a result of cloud, right? Because cloud has limited wiggle room for customization, for saying, oh, well, this is how we do things at UCSD, right? So we need to adapt this to the way we do our business. We're going to see less of that. because when you download your cloud application to your iPhone, right, you don't customize it. Maybe minimally, right? You could change the color or the size of the font, but and now we're talking about big enterprise end-to-end applications that are just like that, right? Where you decide on certain things and then things are standardized, centralized, and so on. And that is part of the cloud world. And I think the timing could not be better, right? Because right now, universities, they need to focus on the core mission, student engagement and research, right? Not putting in place, a payroll system that only works for you. Those days are over, right? If you're going to focus on the core mission. So the cloud back office that we specialize in could not have happened at a better time, right? I mean, in a sense, Vince said, well, not saying COVID is a good thing, but there is kind of a silver lining in that the coincidence of COVID and cloud has been a kind of perfect storm in enabling or driving universities to refocus on the mission and less on the running the business in a unique way.
Yeah, excellent, Malcolm. Vincent, Malcolm, I'd like to offer each of you a chance for a final thought here. This has been terrific, but what's one thing you'd like to leave our friends in the audience with?
For me, it would be make sure your institution can emerge out of the pandemic stronger and better than going in. And that's going to be a different answer for every institution, and there'll be some necessary changes that we're going to have to make. But keep focused on how to use this as an opportunity. Games are won and lost in transition. Big changes are made in transition, and this is a big transition.
Malcolm?
I would say don't even think about going back to normal, right? Don't even talk about back to normal. Think about how you can now, in a sense, as Vince and I said, there's kind of a silver lining here, an opportunity to reinvent, reimagine, rethink how you engage with students, how you drive high velocity and high value research, renew the focus on those and think very carefully about the technology investments that will enable you to do that. Not just the recovery, but the reimagining will require some investments. Those are going to be painful choices. But universities will have to bite the bullet and make those choices because there will be mergers and consolidations of universities. Not everyone is going to come out of this right smelling like roses. And so that's going to take, as I say, some very strategic investments in technology for the next generation of students, researchers, and teachers.
Well, Vince, Kellen, and Malcolm Woodfield, thank you so much for this terrific discussion about higher ed. You've given everybody lots to think about. So thanks so much. This has been great.
Thanks, Bob, for keeping us honest.
Yeah. And all of you who've been with us, thank you so much for being a part of SAP Industries Live. This has been a treat. Everybody at SAP, thanks you for your time and attention. We hope we'll see you again on one of the further episodes in this series. So long.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Vince.